Hello, everyone. Um, Let me just go and start my intro, and I'm just going to apologize now because there is some extreme construction happening in my building. And so if you guys hear really loud noises, I apologize because I cannot control that. But good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I know this is a little bit earlier than we usually go live. But if you're tuning in for the first time, this is the La Maison de Rouge Monday weekly broadcast. Usually this is at 7 p.m., but we are doing it at 3 today. I am your host, Lucy Sweetkill, one half of the duo that is La Maison de Rouge. A little bit about who we are. LMDR is dedicated to expanding the BDSM experience by discussing, educating, and informing our audiences about the intersections of kink, wellness, sexuality, spirituality, and social activism. We aim to create a safe space for discussing these topics, as well as providing an avenue for our guests to share their stories and experiences. So thank you again for joining us tonight, or this afternoon. Our guest is psychotherapist and sex therapist with a private practice at the Manhattan Alternative Wellness Collective in support of all sexualities, genders, and lifestyles. They are proudly out as a member of the kink, poly, queer, and TGNC communities, and also a former sex worker. They created ManhattanAlternative.com, a referral site for sex-positive therapists and wellness professionals. And they co-organize the AltSex NYC Conference, a forum for expansive sexuality education. This afternoon, they will be talking about how sexuality and power dynamics are fluctuating for some people during this pandemic time. Please welcome pronouns they, them, Dr. Dulcinea Pitagora, who also goes by Alex and Kink Doctor. Well, welcome, Alex. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm pretty good. I was a little sleepy this morning, rainy Monday morning, but I'm in the office now working.
Cool.
Except not right now, not working right now. Right now we're hanging out, which is cool. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And we wanted to, you're quite busy. So we were happy to adjust our time today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that.
So why don't we get into this? This is something that I've been really interested in. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, just around what are you seeing? What is coming up for people around power dynamics, sex, sexuality during this very unprecedented time for so many people?
So I'll speak kind of vaguely about different, I'm not going to obviously say anything specific about clients because I'm not at liberty to do that. But, I talk to a lot of different people professionally, also personally, and just seeing what's going on out there. And a lot of different things are happening. I think that for a lot of people that are closeted about their relationships, and maybe they're seeing prodoms or sex workers, or they're seeing someone that's not their partner, and there are additional constraints. The additional constraints are kind of making things feel more intense, and like maybe somebody feels like they need more attention. When things are harder to get, sometimes you just want it that much more, right? Like this is one of those things that we just know happens. That's because when you're either constrained by external things or by your own self, like you're repressing something or you're not letting yourself have it for whatever reason, doesn't go away. It often intensifies. It's like putting it in a pressure cooker. So there's that going on. So sometimes, we'll see people that are just feeling like this more intense need for whatever they need, right?
Yeah.
Other people, their libido is kind of on hold because a lot of us are doing, I would say all of us, but I don't like to make universal statements, but I would kind of say all of us are doing some kind of compartmentalizing in the pandemic, right? Like there is some really it's hard to deal with. And so to function, like to move forward, to take care of ourselves, to do what we need to do, kind of need to, a lot of people are compartmentalizing somewhat. And with that compartmentalizing, sometimes it's libido gets compartmentalized too. Like sometimes that just is going away a little bit for some people. So there's this really wide range of things happening, right?
Yes. So what I've noticed as a provider, first it was noticing just my own stuff, right? Like, okay, I'm not playing. I don't really play that much privately at home because I get a lot of that out in, my work life, which I really like. I actually need that separation.
Yeah.
And I noticed that became very angsty. I became angsty around it. I became very like, okay, like I think I was pushing some of my kinks on my partners a little more because I wasn't doing them in a work capacity or with subs that I enjoy doing certain activities. So I felt my libido gone, but I felt very like, oh, let me push him a little more than maybe was okay, right?
Yeah.
Even though I'm out and everything like that, we just don't have that, that dynamic, intense dynamic, at least the dynamic I have, the amount of intense, like, power dynamic I have with my subs. So I felt very much like, I couldn't express that part. And so I was pushing boundaries.
Yeah. And right. And so, like that's a signal that this is important to you. Like you need it for like probably emotional, psychological balance, right? And all of this part of your identity, I'm guessing. I don't know. I'm not trying to speak for you, but I'm like saying this is a common thing. That's all. Like I wouldn't be surprised. And so it's got to come out somewhere. And then it sounds like you were just noticing that's I think that's like really commonly happening for a lot of people.
Yeah. And then, you have kind of like this mix of things. Like, I think I've had a lot of people ask me like, oh, I just haven't felt kinky at all. Like this thing is important to them, but they just haven't felt kinky at all. Like they just don't want to do any of it. And they're like worried. They're like, I just feel like I don't want to be kinky. I don't want to do any of it.
Worried because they're not feeling it right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Asking themselves.
Yeah.
And what would you say to those who are noticing that it's just like...
Yeah, I've definitely had those conversations too with people. And I've definitely also felt that way myself. It fluctuates and it comes and it goes. And this is something that happens in life anyway, even if you're not in like a worldwide disaster. Like this is sexuality and preferences and things like that fluctuate. For some people, they fluctuate really widely. And for some people, they fluctuate in a more narrow, like not really noticeable way. But it's happening for everyone over the lifespan. Like,
Yeah.
Even people with really like fixed preferences, it still fluctuates. That's just a natural thing with human bodies and human minds. So I would say not to worry about that so much, just, because we don't want to force ourselves to do something that we don't want to do. That's just like crossing our own boundaries. So if your libido or your preferences are not there, I would think like, let's respect that about ourselves. Like, okay, my body, my mind is trying to tell me something. It's saying that's not what I need right now. And that's okay. It's not gone, that's not how sexuality and identity, and that's not how it works. It's just, it's information is all it is. And so sometimes it's like confusing. What is the information, right? But it's not something to really worry too much about. Also, like the play and kink and sex, these are things that are used. They take different priority for different people. For some people, they're always in the forefront. Other people, they're not. And then also sometimes it's more of a coping mechanism. Sometimes it's more of stress release. Sometimes it's purely about pleasure. Sometimes it's about bonding with partners. And that's all okay, but that all fluctuates too. So what do we need right now is the question, right? So that's fine.
What would you say as an advice of kind of checking in, like for those who don't really have the tools, like they're not really, they're not used to this fluctuation, right? They're just kind of like this has been a big thing for a lot of people emotionally, obviously. Like, what are some tools, I guess, that you recommend people doing in regards to checking in with themselves around their sexuality?
I mean, the first thing I would say is, which I already kind of said, I think, is just to kind of like go easy on yourself, really. A lot of people it makes them nervous. Like maybe they feel like they're losing part of themselves, or they don't recognize themselves, or they want to do this thing, but they can't. And so my advice is just to kind of like, let's just be gentle with ourselves and kind of go easy on ourselves. And what's a way to decompress and to kind of, I think it's a signal that we need to take care of ourselves, and maybe in a different way. And so just thinking about what are the different ways that we can take care of ourselves. And that just varies person to person. I also think talking to different people about it, having a good support network is important. Taking a break from whatever somebody needs to take a break from, if it's news or certain people, social media or, whatever.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people ask this question when I see someone talk to someone as a provider, right? Which is like, if you're the only avenue that I can express this part about myself or talk to, how do I go about this? Right? Where they're hiding, they're going for a walk and getting on a phone call with me, right?
Yeah.
Like for those who are closeted and closed off and they don't have the privacy anymore, how do people manage that when they don't have the support systems?
Right. And I guess, and we're talking about in this very particular context of the constraints of the pandemic, right? And like,
yeah,
of course. And because for a lot of people, there's much less privacy because everyone's, maybe the whole family, maybe they were partners or roommates or family or whatever, all at home, working from home. Maybe there's kids going to school at home, and that can really be an issue. And it's not really something that we've had to think too much about, but kink and sexuality aside, having good boundaries around just individuality and having agency, this kind of conversation in relationships is super important anyway. So if you're talking to your partner, like, how do we do this? We're like, if it's a partner, if it's a roommate or whatever it is, how do we make sure, like, we have to stay inside or we can't do all the things we'd like to do? How do we build in space, even if we're in the same place? Like, how can we provide each other some space? Because everybody isn't, it's good to have that separation, right? And so just learning to have conversations about that. And then what you do when you have that space is then maybe you can reach out to somebody that you need to talk to because this is the only person you can talk to, or texting instead of phone calls, different things like that. But just learning how to set boundaries, how to ask for space. You know what I mean? Like what would be some examples, like going for a walk, or like you even said, going for a walk. But even if it's in the same space, like maybe the other person in the room can put headphones on from this time to this time, and you make it a schedule, or just learning how to ask for things, right? And even if it's private, asking for private things.
Yeah, I think that's, those boundaries are so important during this time, especially especially New York. These spaces are not big. Many of us are on top of each other already. And that co-living spaces of any kind get more complicated when everyone is home and together.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, with social distancing, with the uncomfortability around health, and what that looks like with things to do with intimacy that are physical, intimate stuff, people's fears around being physically intimate with others, right? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, again, I've been having a lot of these conversations with people too, and just everybody has different sort of risk tolerances and different fears around health, different resources available. So my thoughts, when I talk to somebody, I try to ask them, we talk through those things. We talk about harm reduction. So what are the things that, because really there's not any way to have zero risk.
Yeah.
Ever, really, particularly right now. And so what is like a manageable level of risk for a given person? And where can they cut corners? What's available? So I don't want to, I'm not saying anything very specific, and that's because like I can't really say, well, like this is the best thing to do and here's what people should do, because that's not, I don't think that's appropriate. I have my opinions, right? I err on the side of being conservative, but I still, I have multiple partners and I want to see different people, but the key is communication and really making sure that everybody is on the same page, being transparent about, if you want to see a person intimately, like, again, it's like learning how to have these hard conversations. These are new conversations too. So it's not like we have necessarily a template for them. It's it's going to be awkward. So maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time it's probably going to be awkward. And it's okay if it's awkward. Like it's okay to make a mistake and then just to like work through it. And just like, this is going to be a hard conversation. Like, how do we, I don't want to offend you. You don't want to offend me. Like, how do we ask for what we need and explain what we've been doing? And you know what I mean? And allow for that space.
I feel like the kind of the kink communities and the queer communities have, these are kind of skills a lot of us have developed in regards to just hard, awkward conversations or harm reduction conversations, right? Like, what's your stats? Where, when have you been tested? It's almost like an extended version of that. Like, who you've been seeing.
Yeah, it is. It's just new questions, right? But some of them aren't new questions. Some are, like you're saying, like some of them are the same question. It's true. I actually, in my practice, I work mostly with people that are kinky or poly, or I work with sex workers, queer people, trans people, anyone with like a different identity or lifestyle than mainstream has had to think about how to communicate this to partners, right? In a different way. It's not just like sliding into the default, the template of assumptions, which right now, any people that are used to that kind of mainstream sort of making assumptions, it's really walking through this style of conversation. Like, well, you're assuming that, but it's also okay. Like if you're assuming that, okay, you're assuming it, but how about just voicing the assumption, just to fact check it, right? And getting used to that. But you're right. Like I would say a lot of people in these communities have been used to these kind of conversations. So the transition into them has been a lot. I've noticed it's been a little, it seems easier for some people than others, for sure.
You use this phrase, style of communication. What do you mean by that? Or can you just expand upon it just for our listeners and viewers?
I guess what I mean by style of communication is, well, some people are more direct communicators, some people are more indirect, and they'll sort of talk around things, and some people are more explicit. And sometimes this is cultural too. It depends on where you are in the world, or how you grew up, how you were taught to communicate. A lot of us were taught to not be direct and specific about things like sexuality and intimacy. relational stuff like that. And so that's really a skill, but we can learn how to do that. And it doesn't have to be so straight, like in your face, like, explicit. People can communicate however they're most comfortable, but it does take some work to kind of, to be able to sometimes even just say the words, like to say the words out loud about what they want, so to ask what they want. It can be really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for a lot of people right now, right? Is like, how do I ask that I need some private time without offending a partner? Or how do I bring up that I'm not feeling so sexual or feeling these things right now with maybe a partner who expects it or something? Or how about when we're on two different levels, during this pandemic time? Like, how do we communicate when somebody's like, during this pandemic time, they're like flourishing in their kinks, and then another person's just like, nope. Like, and they're partners, maybe they're both open,
Right.
How do we like tackle those challenges? That's what I'm seeing a lot too in response in a lot of my clients and subs. Beyond just privacy, they're just like, I feel like I'm in a different wavelength than a play partner or a life partner. And their kinks are just totally misaligned, and their power dynamics are totally misaligned right now.
Yeah.
I think that's been a hard thing. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah. Well, again, like whenever I have conversations about stuff like that, I try to let people know that that's not something to be too concerned about. It doesn't mean there's something wrong. It just means that this is what's going on right now. And then to kind of normalize that, because that is a thing that happens a lot. Right now, I feel like our situation is kind of unprecedented for this time period and culturally. So I think it's going to kind of bring up a lot of different things in different people.
Yeah.
And so just in having the conversations with partners, like I usually would help people learn how to communicate their needs, but also ask for their partner's needs so that it feels balanced. Because one of the things that people are reluctant to do in asking for things is, they don't want to, like, there might be a tendency to, it's like an all or nothing. It's like, I only say what I need, or my partner only says what they need. So, but learning to ask the questions, like maybe ask the partner first, like, I would love for you to tell me, what's going on with you. And then I have some things I'd like to tell you about me, but I want to make sure that we both have a conversation about what we both need and where we're at and how we're feeling about it, so that, it doesn't feel like just too much one way or the other.
Totally.
Because when we're anxious and kind of wrapped up in our own feelings, it can be really easy to forget that other people might be feeling anxious and they might have stuff they want to say too. And it's like, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to blurt it all out. And then, that might not go so well. So slowing things down and remembering to ask questions and try to keep it balanced is really good. But also in power dynamics, I feel like particularly, we talked before a little bit about like provider relationships, but with relationships, personal relationships that have a power dynamic. Well, first of all, it's my opinion, and it's not only my opinion, but I think every relationship is a power dynamic, whether it's explicit or not, right? Yeah. And I'm talking about in mainstream, I'm talking about romantic relationships, talking about at work, in the world, obviously. And this is part of what's going on right now too. We're seeing a lot of really highlighted focus on problems with racism. And there's been a lot of, this pandemic has really highlighted a lot of problems with power dynamics in that way. Like who's getting taken care of, who's getting, thrown under the bus, like this kind of stuff, which it's not new information, unfortunately, but there's really a spotlight. And so all this to say that like there are power dynamics everywhere all the time, right? So one of the things that I think is really beautiful about BDSM power dynamics in a relationship is that they're typically more intentional and they're explicit. They're in front of you and you've talked about them, you know what they are, you know, whereas most of the time it's not. Like most of the time it's just like, oh, we're going to pretend like nothing's going on here, but like there is, obviously, right? And that's dangerous, and that's where oppression comes in, right? But in a personal relationships where you're agreeing to it and you're like, I am in this role, I'm in this role, you know, that's really fantastic. Having said all that, I have seen and talked to other people where these non-consensual power dynamics that are going on and that are really being highlighted are affecting our consensual power dynamics. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What have you seen in that? Like, I want to say something else, but in regards to what you just said, how the non-consensual power dynamics are really affecting their consensual power dynamics.
Well, I think it's really highlighting for some people. This is not for everyone, of course. Like, I don't mean to say that at all, but I have spoken to some people who feel like it's kind of throwing a wrench in, maybe. Like it doesn't feel quite as sexy to some people to engage in power dynamic the way they normally would because of all the, you know, the injustice and the oppression, and maybe this is even entering into the relationship in other ways too. And so then the same kind of play isn't going to fly right now. Maybe that feels too harsh, or maybe it feels too real or too reflective of something that's non-consensual. Flip side is that maybe people will lean into that and really use that as a way to transcend. That happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that both of those things probably happen. But for some people, it changes the power dynamic in a personal relationship. For some people, it's making them need to do something a little different. Maybe, for example, I've spoken to dominants who are feeling like, actually, I'm playing more of a service top role right now. Like that feels better to me right now. I want my submissive or my partner to be, you know, I want to make sure that we're like fully doing what they want to do and that I'm facilitating that, because leaning on the, you know what I'm saying? Like leaning on the power, the dominant, it just feels like feels a little off for them right now.
Yeah.
Not that that's a good or bad thing. I think it's good to pay attention to that and then make adjustments and do what feels right for everyone. Yeah. And also some people are leaning more into that as a way to feel like they have something that they can control, and they want their relationship, their power dynamic to be a comforting thing that's the same as it's always been. And so then it won't change in that respect, because that's something that they can make a decision on and they can do on purpose and intentionally and talk about. Whereas stuff in the world, it's really hard to, you know, figure out what to do with that sometimes. And do we have any control at all? Like there are things we can do, but you know what I mean? So
yeah, I definitely feel I've been feeling a lot of, because power dynamics is very important to me in my play. Like that's actually the core of mostly what I do. I do very little service topping anymore. And things have to have a very like power dynamic aspect to it, like more intense, more explicit, very giving in. And I've leaned into that more because it feels more comforting. But I've also have noticed having to take a step back from those I feel like like playing with certain folks that I feel are too privileged sometimes. Like it's brought up my own feeling around like injustices, right? And I've had to say, even as a provider, like I can't see you right now because I've got my stuff attached to this right now, and it's too highlighted, you know. Right. That's been very interesting to really sense.
Yeah, good for you. I mean, that's super responsible on your part to not, like, you want to play in a certain way and you're respecting that.
Yeah, and to be like, okay. And that's something that I tell other providers, like, it's okay to like just say you're not ready to see somebody if it's bringing up a lot of things right now for you. You know, like I've been enjoying focusing on playing with women and kind of giving women that opportunity to like feel vulnerable in a very safe space, especially in this very vulnerable time for a lot of people. So that's been very like fascinating. But one thing you mentioned that is something, this phrase of something that I've thought about is, you know, with power dynamics, like you don't have to be in power to feel empowered. And that's what I think is really important right now, is feeling empowered, even if you're not in the position of power, like in a DS dynamic or just in the world, right? Like, what can we do to help ourselves feel more empowered in whatever is happening in our life and in the world, right? And I think as a lot of subs sometimes forget that they can still be very empowered in their, even if they're not in power in the power dynamic world, they still can be very empowered in their role, right, that they choose.
Yeah.
I'm gonna like, because I want this to be a very open conversation for those of you out there, just because we wanted to do this. We wanted to do this interview because we had been getting a lot of, you know, just from talking to clients, talking to providers, talking to our subs, you know, all this stuff has been coming up. Mental health has been a really big one around their kinks, around their sexuality, around just like expression, around power, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the reason why we reached out to kind of have you come on and talk about this more. So I really want to open it up for folks. If you have any questions, please put them in the comment section. Anything that you want Alex or I to, you know, possibly answer, please be respectful. There may be things that Alex won't be able to answer depending on what it is, or I won't be able to answer. So I'm just going to let you all know that now. But if there's any questions coming up, please feel free to put them up, and I will put them on the screen if they feel, if they're respectful and not show us your feet. So what are, you know, until we get some questions, I do want to ask, what are some things people can put into practice right now? Is there any, you know, is there any things you find that people can actually put into practice during this time to help either with their mental health, like journaling or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a personal thing. I think even just stopping and asking themselves, like taking a moment with yourself and asking yourself, like, what could I put into practice? Like that right there is a great thing to do. Like just to stop, just kind of slow down, give yourself a minute. And you know what? Sometimes it needs to, like for a lot of people, it's distracting. They need to be distracted right now. Things are overwhelming and they can't think about it all, you know, all the time. And that's okay. You know, this is what I'm telling people is sometimes people are worried about coping mechanisms, things that they're doing that they're just worried about, like binging an entire season of some show or something in one day to avoid things. And sometimes it's okay to do stuff like that. And that's not like my advice is to go like, why doesn't everybody go and binge it? You know, I don't care. Like, I don't care if people are doing that or not. I just am saying like what we're doing right now is different than maybe like what we're going to do long term for coping mechanisms. So if whatever feels right in the moment, and trying not to judge yourself, and if it's like, you know, hopefully it's relatively healthy, right?
Yeah.
Because anything can maybe go too far. But yeah, I think journaling is great. It's a nice way to kind of, especially if you're a person who, journaling can be great for somebody who like has thoughts that's spinning around in their head and they just spin and spin and spin. And like can't go to sleep or like get, you know, fixated on certain thoughts, journaling is a nice way to kind of get those out. So you can put it down and be like, I don't have to keep thinking about them over and over again because I wrote them down and now I'm going to set it over there, you know.
Yeah.
Or it can be a helpful way to work through things. A lot of people are doing meditation, yoga. There are a lot of apps, meditation apps, where you can do like really brief meditations. Like sometimes people get freaked out about meditation because they're like, oh, I'm going to have to sit levitating for an hour. And, you know, but like, that's not, you know, there's not any perfect way to do anything. Like you can do it kind of wrong and it still is fine. Like, you know what I mean? There's not really a wrong way to do stuff like that. Or just like a lot of people are needing to move their body more. So we don't have to like figure out some kind of like calisthenics routine at home, but even just like remembering to get up and walk around or stretch or, you know, do stuff like that. Because there's just for a lot of people, there's less of that going on. So just remembering just the little things to take care, just the baseline, like, am I like eating when I'm supposed to eat and drinking enough water and trying to sleep more? Taking care of those kind of baseline things is really important. I mean, I know it probably sounds obvious and like, but I love to say obvious things like that because sometimes we forget how foundational and important those things are, because that just gives us more, you know, emotional and mental energy and psychological energy to figure out what to do next, you know?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The little basic stuff, like little healthy routines that, you know, ground you and make you feel a little more, you know, solid in yourself, which, you know, I like to ask, like, do the things that bring you joy. And if at the moment the joy is binging a whole season of something, sometimes you need that, you know, just make sure you get up and use the restroom too.
Yeah.
Someone asked, do you have any advice for what someone can do to increase their own sexual arousal and desire? That's interesting.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Chris Ryan, 34.
I like the little picture they have there. That's cute.
Yeah. Oh, like if you're feeling like there's been a decrease in it during this time, is that what in reference to? Like if...
Right. There's a lot of reasons why that could be happening.
Yeah. Please, we would love to answer this question, but please be a little more specific. Are you just saying during this time, or?
You know, the first thing that pops into my head when I see something like that is like the question I would have is like, is this person masturbating? Like, I think that a lot of times people don't like to talk about this. I do a lot of couples therapy with people, and sometimes I'll ask them about, because this question comes up in, like you mentioned earlier, about people having discordant desire or preferences, just meaning one's higher, one's lower, it's different. And one of the questions, there's like a bunch of questions that I'll ask, and one of them is about masturbation. And a lot of times people are like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said it. It's like, well, it's so funny because it's the one thing that the most people do and the fewest people talk about. Like, you know, anyway, I don't care. Like I'll talk about whatever. But that pops into my mind with this person's question, like, how often is this person masturbating? Like, you know, or like not even trying to necessarily have an orgasm, but just like feel physical pleasure. Maybe it's just like, does it feel really good just to take a bath? Right? Just like feel something on the body that feels really good, like taking care of the body, just feeling pleasure in that way. Like, so there are different kinds of pleasure that we can feel.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like the masturbation thing is always interesting because I ask that question a lot because it does, you know, and what does it mean to the other person? You know, is masturbating for them do they feel they do it too much? Do they feel they don't do it enough? Do they feel like it's just a stress reliever, or do they try to do it for other pleasure? How are you connecting with yourself around just self-pleasure, which can tell a lot about your mental state too?
Yeah, exactly. And like when you say too much, too little, that's always interesting too, because there are certainly people that are worried about stuff like that. And then my question to that is like, as compared to who, like relative to who, too much, too little, like, you know, who told you what was the right amount, and why do you think they said that? Like, where did that come from? You know what I mean? It's probably too much if like you're physically injuring yourself, like unless that's part of your masturbatory practice and like not causing you permanent damage, like unless like this, all of this stuff is like conditional, right? But like there's not really any right answer as far as that goes. But it's interesting when somebody thinks about that, because it makes me wonder, you know, where does that come from? But
yeah, I think the same when I'm like, how do you masturbate? And then sometimes people will just say like, I masturbate too much. Then I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? What's too much? You know? And, you know, if you feel like it's too much, like why? Why is that coming up for you?
yeah.
And understanding where your thoughts are coming around some of those self-pleasure ideas. I guess this person has yet to add to the additional question. Someone did ask, do you recommend abstinence?
There's a question for me. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm curious about where this comes from, but I don't typically recommend abstinence unless it's something that somebody wants to do. Like I don't really have a firm position on that. I do think that if abstinence is something that's going to feel really good to someone, like sometimes people do like chastity play, for example, and which is a clear form of abstinence. And that is often in a power dynamic, and that can be super pleasurable for people. I feel like abstinence, when it's a form of repression, can be really unhealthy. So this is an example of something that can go either direction, depending on the motivation and the intention around it, and like the why. Like why? My question for that is like, well, that depends, right? It depends. Like what is your goal? Like why do the abstinence, right? But like if I had to do a simple answer, it's like not necessarily. I don't necessarily recommend abstinence, but in a situation like, let's say we're in a pandemic, which we are, and it's important to quarantine because of all the reasons why it would be important. Maybe it's not possible to have sex with a partner or to play with a partner. But there are other ways to interact intimately, like, you know, just with oneself, or, you know, with distance, like on, you know, using technology or whatever. So
yeah,
that's not such a cut and dry question or answer, I guess. But
well, I don't think most of like, you know, I don't think there are cut and dry answers to anything, right?
Exactly, right, exactly.
It's one of those things right now where we are living in this very interesting time. And not only the pandemic, but everything else that's being very much highlighted, resources, right?
Yeah.
And even though, and this is like in the world of so much technology too, which is interesting, you know? So you kind of know how everyone else is doing in a way, you know, when before you kind of only knew really small communities. Now it's like you can see all these responses all over the world to how everything is done. And that can feel very overwhelming, you know, especially when you're seeing people be very sexual on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And then there are other people who are just like, wait, I don't feel anything right now. And everything is stressful. And I feel no pleasure. And it's so hard to gauge yourself in regards to like, I think that comparison can sometimes be overwhelming with social media, right? The kind of compare and despair situation.
Right. Right. Like, how come I'm not able to do what these people are doing? Or is there something wrong with me that I'm not like but also I think it's important to remember that we're not seeing everyone's, you know, there are certainly, I agree with you. There's a lot more, you know, there's just a lot more happening on social media that we can see, but there are a lot of people that don't have access to technology or social media. And then there are also people who are very introverted or who can't do it right now. They just don't want to post things about themselves. But they're still having feelings and doing things, and we don't see them. We don't know about them because we're not being told about them. So it's just important to remember that what we see is not, first of all, it's not the entire population, and it's also not the entire person. Like that person who posted something is just, they posted that thing. They didn't post absolutely everything that's going on, and it might seem like it sometimes, but there's other stuff going on that we don't know. So we can't assume that we know exactly what's going on there.
I'd love to know your thoughts on social media and its effects you feel on sexuality. You know, like with all this access, you know, obviously we see some really great things like community building, right? Like whatever you identify, there is a community for you. And this just comes to mind because I just watched The Social Dilemma, and they were talking about the psychology and the physicality of it and mental health around social media and the compare and like the rise of like teen suicide and females, you know, since social media had begun. And so I'd love to know your thoughts around that as a mental health provider.
Yeah. I think, well, what you said about community is really true and really important, because for a lot of people who are in places where even places where, let's say that they identify as gay or something. And for a lot of us, we're like, yeah, that's great. No big deal, you know. But in some places it's really dangerous to be out, or, you know, geographically, or in someone's family, or, you know, depending. And so social media is really crucial for people like that, and can actually help, I was say mitigate, but like help offset suicide, for example, or suicidal ideation. But the thing about it's also a social space. It's like this weird kind of, it's a location, even though it's like a weird, like it's in the ether or something, but it's a place we go. And right now, especially, right, because it's a place where a lot of people can go when they can't go other places. So, but it's kind of like, it's not really that new now, but like you were saying, if there was a rise in uptick in suicides among teenage girls, for example, there wasn't really a precedent for what to do. And this problem of bullying and comparison, there wasn't like a support system in place. There's a lot more supports now.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that we couldn't anticipate that. We didn't know that was going to be a thing, because, I mean, I think maybe we could have, but I'm not so sure how on top of, honestly, mental health stuff and like social support our culture is all the time. Like, I think there's we could do better in that regard. But yeah, there's just a lot of, it's interesting. I think it's important though, and it's there for a reason. And we want to connect around identity and just to be together, you know, like connecting with humans. It's part of what keeps us, you know, psychologically healthy.
Yeah. It's been I have a love-hate relationship with social media and around like the sexuality and my own sexuality around it, and just mental health, right? Like, it can be great seeing all the supportive stuff that happens, but it also can be like, it can feel so lonely at times, and can feel so like, am I good enough? Or look at all these people doing all these great things, right? And that's an interesting, I think this is a new kind of newer way of like mental health issues that we're tackling, right? Especially with young folks, what that might look like. I want to repeat one more time for for anybody. If they have any questions, you're welcome. Most of you all know that I wait to the end, but if there are any questions, please bring them up. I did have someone say they use abstinence to build their desire, but only for a few days at a time. So that, I think that's in kink, you know, it's tease and deny, it's chastity play. These are all very common things to help, you know, make desire, you know, even more prominent. I definitely believe in a lot of self-play, especially during this time, in little ways. Sometimes, you know, maybe a little cross-dressing, wearing something underneath your clothing.
Sure.
Chastity, like, you know, self-imposed chastity. You don't have to have a device. You can just, you know, not do something.
Well, mental bondage is the most challenging kind anyway, right? Like that's, according to me, that's what I think. But,
like I can't, you know, a cage is it's nice. It's very representative, a belt, but really it's the mental bondage. That self-control can be very interesting. And also like erotica as a replacement sometimes to porn for people out there, just to kind of, you know, exercise your, you know, largest sexual organ, your brain, differently. I've been advising people on like audio erotica, you know, reading erotica outside of just use your imagination sometimes if porn is something that you either can't have access to just because of the noise or whatever, or if you want to try something different in regards to like, you know, finding different ways to pleasure yourself. That's been a big thing.
Yeah, sometimes people get into a rut with porn. And so I think that's a great idea. And also, or writing some erotica. It doesn't have to be like public, you don't have to like make it so good that you can publish it, but just something that turns you on. And you're absolutely right. It really, like with reading things or listening to things, it's different than visual, because the way our brains work, we're going to have a visual anyway. With the listening or with reading or something, our brain will create this whole scene and it'll be tailored specifically to, that's what the beauty of that is, right? Because with porn, you just get what you get. And you can't really like expand on that visually so much. And I don't think there's anything wrong with watching porn either. Like some people have different opinions about that, but I think that there's, you know, that's in your repertoire, that's fine. But yeah, increasing muscle memory and other part, like exercising different parts of your sexual brain, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, for the person who was asking about maybe increasing sexual arousal, that could be very helpful. Because I agree. I think people, you know, and I've seen myself do it, you get into that rut of like watching stuff. And so you're just sort of you're not as active in the sexual experience. You're sort of just taking it, just like you would watch any movie, right? You're just kind of like
passive. Well, and so here's the other thing is with like when a lot of people who watch porn and they get into kind of a porn rut, sometimes it's just like efficiency. They want to have an orgasm. It's fine. Like it's a good release. It's like healthy to have an orgasm. That's great. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like the end goal in every kind of sexual interaction. But if that's what you want, then fine. And some people achieve that. They'll watch like their little clip, like they know exactly what to watch, and it's going to like help them have an orgasm. Totally fine. But also, if you would like to expand your repertoire, increase desire, discover things about your capacity for pleasure, what you can do is slow things down a lot, because desire is about change. It's about going from like a baseline state to an aroused state, and that requires a change, right? So then how do you create change? And if you slow down that trajectory, what are you going to learn in this arc, right? From the baseline to arousal. if you slow that down, and there can be like all sorts of like physiological changes, body chemistry, brain chemistry changes that you didn't know because you just cut to the chase all the time and you went to that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying the alternative would be really slow things down and try to just experiment, and maybe abstinence, but maybe not abstinence, but like as a way, like you were saying, tease and denial, that could be part of it too. And it's just the slowing things down and see what you discover in that process.
Yeah, I've been advising many people during this time to practice a little tantric masturbation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know, which is much more intentional. It's not about the orgasm.
Yeah.
You know, set some time aside for you and give yourself like an hour of alone time if you can, to touch and feel and think and set the mood. You know, if you're a candles person, lighting, music, have intention of kind of discovering and just feeling and playing and reconnecting with your kind of body and mind without like the focus of an orgasm, and see what you discover.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's really smart. And I talk to people about that a lot, when, especially people that are really hyper-focused on orgasm. Yeah. My suggestion is to do the opposite. Like, well, let's pretend like that's not even part of the goal. And maybe there's, different people, like explore the other stimulus. Like if texture is important, then like, what are the different textures you can like put on and around your body? Or maybe you just lay on the cold floor and that's the texture you're looking, I don't know, it could be anything. So you can experiment and be creative in that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think this is a good time to experiment on what pleasure means to you in different ways. It's a good reevaluation time for a lot of people in regards to, and a good check-in time too, to be like, what's going on with myself physically and mentally around, if specifically around my sexuality and pleasure and eroticism, right? What does that look like to me right now? And if those things are non-existent at the moment, then it's just a little break. Take a little break.
Yeah, I wouldn't freak out about that. It's not gone forever.
Yes, I did say that. Setting a timer was a great suggestion for self-play, you had said once. That can be helpful because I think it can make people, set a timer of what time you have. Like sometimes people feel overwhelmed with thinking like, oh, I got to do this for like 6 hours. And no, you only got 30 minutes. Play 30 minutes, it's okay to schedule that time in. I schedule self-care time and I schedule in self-play time just because my schedule is crazy. And if I don't, then I will not remember it. And sometimes I get caught up in the world and stuff. So it gives me time to say, you know what, this is Lucy time and Lucy's going to do these things. So, that's something that, I suggest to those of you out there. So I think we're almost at the hour, so I don't want to take up any more of your time, Alex, but I do want to let our audience know. First off, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
And for those of you who will be watching this later as well, please look below. We've had your websites up as well as your social media. So once this goes onto YouTube, people will be able to connect to that as well. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. And again, thank you, Alex, for joining us and making time for us. I'm glad we can make this work. Thank you for your wisdom and your knowledge. And for those of you who are searching for a therapist, I refer all my subs and clients to visit Manhattan Alternative because you do not need to live in the city or even near the city to have appointments. As we all know, Zoom has been really great for all of that. So please, seek, just seek the support and help you need. This is a really good time to do that for yourself.
Yeah. And I just remembered I wanted to let people know there's a link on the top of the page on Manhattan Alternative for an entire page of people of therapists of color. So if like somebody is looking, would like to connect with somebody specifically in that way, then it's easy to find on the website. So.
Awesome. Yeah, that website is really great. So that's where I refer a lot of people to check out kink affirming, LGBTQ affirming, like all kind of alternative sexualities and identities, which is amazing. So thank you again. And I want to wish everyone a good Monday, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.